For this video, I'm gonna show you how to create an Instagram account with a few thousand followers, starting from zero using AI. Before I dive in, I want to give you a little bit of the backstory. I have a friend who created an Instagram account using AI with Garfield the cat memes. He started every day posting really the same image that had been manipulated with an AI prompt, capturing all kinds of things from the different season and times of the year to public interests. And what you'll notice as you hover over a few of these key pieces is he did a great job. There are posts with 100 or so likes, but then every once in a while you'll come up on one, 3,000 likes. He's got some with 5,000, mashed potatoes, 3,000 likes. The best part was a number of people from this community online were taking his content and reposting it and resharing it on their own feeds, getting tens and sometimes hundreds of thousands of likes. This was the prompt for me. I saw this and I thought to myself, ooh, I want something like this. So I reached out to him via text, asking for some help on an idea that I had. Unlike him, I wasn't as interested in a niche part of the internet. I wanted a big cult-like following of people who have a very high lifetime value of a customer, and so CrossFit came to mind. I joined CrossFit a few years ago, had this idea every time I looked at the kettlebell that it's just like a really clean, crisp shape, and might I be able to do something similar? The state of AI wasn't really there yet to get a consistent result. It didn't really understand the merging of these two concepts and really struggled. But then something changed. ChatGPT integrated with DALL-E, and you could start to prompt different images straight from the ChatGPT interface. And when that update went live, I was able to get pretty close to what I wanted. So December 21st, 2023, I launched my own Instagram account, posting a single photo every single day of, you guessed it, a kettlebell. The result, over 3,000 followers in just a few days of building this out. That's not why we're all here to celebrate this Instagram account. What we're here is to talk about how I did it. All right, so let's start with my first prompt. Here's the first prompt that got me somewhere close to what I was looking for, right? You can see the face is embossed into the actual kettlebell with the beard itself, and I started chipping away at different things, noticing that the AI was adding different artifacts. And so my prompt started to evolve because I needed to give it more and more clarity to get a standard result each time. Now this one starts to look pretty great, but the issue here is consistency. So it's not using a true white background. And so my prompt went on to include actually requesting a white background with the kettlebell always facing forward. Sometimes depending on the image, the AI would want to shift it, focusing in a different direction, but that would change the lighting and all of that. It also didn't give me a perfect result that I could just post online. I would usually take it and with a few seconds or a few minutes in Photoshop, be able to remove all the excess color, standardize the blacks and grays so that the result looked pretty standard. Once I had something that looked close enough to what I was looking for, I then created a super prompt, giving it a template that it could use so that in the future, all I would need to say is the name of what I wanted or generate a kettlebell of, and then it would start to use the underlying prompt and give me back a more standard result. And so what you can see here is that once this prompt template was put in place and ChatGPT was working off of that template, time and time again, it was able to give me a much crisper result. In hindsight, I could have probably done a better job of the sizing of what I was looking for, like a 2/3 aspect ratio, or even the shape of the actual image itself. Every once in a while, it would hallucinate and start to add hands and the person who's drawing it and all of that. I noticed this was mostly when I would iterate on top of an existing drawing. So it would give me this, and then I would give it how I wanted that drawing to be manipulated, and then it would start to deviate from the underlying template. So I'm going to talk through a few things that I think it did very well, and then a few areas where the AI really struggled. One thing that it struggled on was heads and faces. So here's me trying to get a kettlebell of Elvis Presley. And what you'll notice is it did the snowman and the gingerbread very well, right? Where the entire shape of the kettlebell was the underlying subject matter. But here, when you got into faces, it wouldn't incorporate those two concepts as smoothly. So it really struggled with faces. I tried to get Donald Trump, and you'll notice that it said, hey, I won't do that, which is pretty frustrating. It would do that of certain public figures that were just older and dead, most likely. I tried to do some stuff. My brother is in the United States Marine Corps. I tried to get a Marine style kettlebell. I did some weird stuff again with faces. So faces are an area that it struggled over and over again throughout the project. And quite frankly, I never actually found an answer to do faces better. Okay, so another area that the AI struggled was in sports balls. And so here you can see my attempt at a tennis ball. And while it got the color, and even here it kind of got the velvety texture, it did not get the curve of the white line on a tennis ball. I had a similar challenge with basketballs and a number of other sports balls that it didn't get quite right. Something you will see though is a ball that it did get right is the golf ball. It did a great job with the golf ball, and I think part of why the golf ball worked was because it is consistent all the way around the golf ball. There is some weird coloring and shading here, but by and large, it got, all of those little uniform divots around the ball. It did a pretty good job of pulling that off. If you spent any time on the Kettlebell on the Brain Instagram account, what you'll notice is attached to each image is a pun or a phrase or a quote, some type of clever dad joke worthy material that corresponds to the image. In a perfect world, AI would have given me this as well, though one thing I've noticed as a limitation of AI is humor. And maybe my standards are too high, but AI does not currently do a great job with humor. And so usually these phrases I was coming up with on my own, but that doesn't mean I didn't try. So I asked ChatGPT to give me a list of different puns around different topics. I would come up with the kettlebell idea, and then I would ask it to give me puns on this topic. I also went in the other direction. I said, hey, you just give me a list of the best stuff you got, and let me see if I can then work to create a kettlebell for it. And in both directions, it was kind of just I would say 1 out of every 10, maybe 1 out of every 20 was useful. It usually came back to me just writing that dad joke level line all by myself. Another observation using AI is glass, creating glass, things that have liquids in them, all of that. We would get very close, and the depth perception that occurs within glass is something that both in terms of generating the prompt as well as the result came back pretty inconsistent. So I'm gonna show you a couple of images that I was working on and why it didn't feel quite right. So here, what you'll notice inside of this jar is the waves are only pooling against one side of the jar, which would be okay if the liquid was sloshing in the jar, but what I would expect to see then is the water line or the liquid line on the back end would be lower. Also, this little pepper or whatever it put inside doesn't seem to be sitting in the same depth in the image. And then of course, some of the bubbles look like they're on the outside of the jar, not bubbling up from the liquid themselves. Here, what you can see is that the bubbles seem to be in the glass layer and not inside of the liquid that is within the jar. And so usually anything that involves a glass structure. I did a champagne bottle at the beginning of the new year. Those involved some pretty heavy photoshopping. The usual workflow went something like this. Generate a kettlebell of a briefcase. Now, the result was way too close to a briefcase than it was a kettlebell. If you were to look at this, you would see that's just a weird looking briefcase. And so with a few back and forth conversations, I could get it to something that looks like this, which is very clearly a kettlebell in the style of a leather briefcase. Most of the time, the buckles and all that kind of stuff could be a little weird, but then it would just hit the nail on the head. And so this is an example of something that within 3 or 4 chats back and forth, I had my image for the day. Every once in a while, ChatGPT would do something that was pretty delightful. I'm generating kettlebells. Here I am trying to create a pig head kettlebell, and I wanted to add a touch of color. And the way that it added the color was pretty cool. I like that color style, and the beautiful part about collaborating like this with AI to create art is I could ask it to explain that style to me, which is exactly what it did. And then I could proceed to say, hey, well, in the future, just use this. When I say I want something in color, use this style. And now I am not just having my underlying template, but I have different variations or modifications off of that primary template that I could use. The most frustrating part about collaborating with AI is copyrights and restrictions. So what you'll see here is a series of asks and attempts to get to a Grinch style kettlebell. Can you imagine a Grinch style kettlebell? Of course you can imagine it. And if I was working with somebody on Fiverr, they would just do it. But because of all the controversy today around copyrights and AI, it took a lot of back and forth. I could not get ChatGPT to give me a Grinch style kettlebell. All right, that's a wrap for the first of 2 videos on how to create an Instagram account using AI generated art. We've talked about creating the art, so subscribe and get early access to our next video that is sharing about how to use Instagram to build that following.